Terminal Island, California, where the atmosphere is of the sea, where the shops supply ships and the needs of the men who go down to the sea in them, where all activity centers on the task of providing millions of American tables with the sea's most delightful delicacy, the tender, firm, light meat of the tuna. Tuna Street ends at the water's edge, the busy harbor of Los Angeles. Here is Fish Harbor, where dock the hundreds of fishing boats that make this one of the world's most important fishing ports. Dominating the waterfront of Tuna Street and the destination of many of the boats tying up here is this large group of buildings, a cannery where the choicest fare from the ocean is prepared and packed for final consumption in all corners of the country. In tribute to the tuna upon which this great business was built, around the entrance is a tile mural depicting the tuna in all its brilliant color, variety, and beauty. Would you know more of this romantic industry that has its home on Tuna Street? Let's go inside.
Well, Mr. Lane, this is a real pleasure. So after all these years, you finally decided to pay us that long-promised visit.
Yes. Decided I needed a vacation. Then I thought it'd be a good idea to come out to the coast and visit all the food packers out here. I've handled enough of their products.
I didn't know just exactly when to expect you. Otherwise, I'd have had brass bands and bunting up. Well, why not? Receiving one of our oldest friends? Oh, sure, pardon me. I want you to meet Joe Gates, our production manager. Joe, Mr. Lane.
How do you do, Mr. Gates?
Glad
to know you.
Mr. Lane. Glad to know you.
So you've come to see the sights on the coast, Mr. Lane?
Yes, my first trip out here. Sorry I put it off so long.
Let's have your coat and hat, Mr. Lane.
Thanks.
I suppose you find things a lot different out here.
You bet I do. Besides the scenery and the climate, I've had a liberal education in packing food products in the different plants up north.
Well, that education won't be complete until you've seen the inside of the tuna industry, eh, Joe?
You couldn't have come at a more opportune time, Mr. Lane. Our biggest boat, the American Beauty, is just docked with about 400 tons of tuna on board. There she is now, getting ready to unload.
Say, that's a good-looking vessel.
Yes, sir. The American Beauty is one of our largest and finest clipper ships. Now, if you look right out here, the little boats we used originally could not go far from port, and they didn't have to. They caught all their tuna in the waters off Southern California.
We use them only for mackerel and sardine fishing now.
Then they had to extend their operations down to Lower California. Our boats like the American Beauty and the Yankee go as far south as the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. But most of the catch is made in Central American waters, in the vicinity of Costa Rica and Panama.
Hello, J.P.
Hello.
How are you, Joe?
How are you, Bob? Come on in, Captain. We were just talking about the American Beauty. Captain Fisher, I want you to know Mr. Lane of Philadelphia. Mr. Lane has handled our tuna since we first put it out.
Glad to know you, Mr. Lane. Glad to know you, Captain Fisher.
Did you have a good trip, Bob?
Very good. Fishing was the best in years, but not as much excitement as on that last trip with the motion picture crew aboard. By the way, how'd those pictures turn out?
Oh, we just got the films this morning. All cut and ready to show. I'll get the projector. Oh, will you pull those curtains, Captain? You see, Mr. Lane, we have such a colorful business, we decided to have a color motion picture made.
Oh, I see.
Most of it was filmed on the last trip of the American Beauty. So we've been waiting for the captain before having a preview.
Ah.
I'm glad you're here to see them. This is the first time our operations have been filmed in color.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Joe, set up the screen, will you?
You said something about having a brass band and bunting to welcome me. But I don't know of anything that you could do better than to preview a new picture on just the things that I want to see.
Well, that's fine. The soundtrack hasn't been made yet. But, Captain, I think it would be a good idea for you to explain the shots made on the American Beauty as we go along.
Okay.
All right, Joe, let's go. Turn off the lights.
Well, here we are, pulling out on one of our regular trips, all loaded with fuel and stores, ready to chase the tuna all the way to Cape Horn if we have to. We have lots to do on the American Beauty before we reach the fishing grounds. We use nets for catching sardines and other small fish to use for tuna bait, and those nets have to be mended, and this is the only time we get to mend them.
That looks like intricate work.
All of our men can mend nets, splice rope, and do all the things that are nearly as rare at sea today as on an old square-rigged ship. We don't use a regular type of hook to catch tuna. We use this barbless hook. The tuna practically fall off this kind of hook when they're landed on the deck. A bunch of white feathers over the hook makes it a completed squid. The feathers take the place of bait on the hook. They attract the tuna after we bring a school close alongside with live sardine bait.
Say, I never knew that. I always thought tuna were caught in nets like other types of fish.
No. Fish caught in nets die before they can be taken out of the nets. But when they're snagged with a hook, they are bled before they're stored away, as you'll see later on. Now, we use heavy bamboo poles, and the only thing that has to be done to them is to bind the ends to hold a loop. The line holding the squid is made fast to the loop. Then the pole's ready for fishing. We reach this position when we're about 8 days out of home port.
There's a beautiful scene.
Well, that's the lighthouse at Corinto, Mr. Lane. Corinto is one of the oldest towns on the west coast of Central America. It was built way back in the Spanish days, and at one time it was quite a hangout for pirates. Now here we are flying the Nicaraguan ensign and the yellow quarantine flag to show that we haven't cleared quarantine and customs yet. But of course, on the main truck, we fly the good old stars and stripes to show our nationality.
Why do you stop in Corinto?
Well, one of the best bait fishing grounds is close to Corinto in the Gulf of Fonseca. That is Nicaraguan territory. So we have to put in at Corinto to get a Nicaraguan permit to fish for bait.
Gosh, that's a bustling metropolis.
One of the main drags in Corinto.
Those are typical tropical streets. I've seen streets exactly like that all over the West Indies.
They still use oxen down there for most of their hauling, so the boys usually choose one of these two-steer power hacks when they're going someplace. Now we're on the way to the Gulf of Fonseca, which is only about 50 miles up the coast from Corinto. Those rocks are a landmark that tells us we're reaching the bait fishing grounds. As they heave in sight, we are entering the Gulf of Fonseca, and we start to rig everything up for bait fishing. As soon as the ship heaves to, we put over the small boats that will spread the large seine. Now the seine is being loaded into one of the boats. It takes a pretty large seine to haul in enough bait for a boat our size. Well, this is the easiest part of bait fishing, riding away from the ship to where we spread the seines. The fellows get a chance to take it easy for a few minutes. Now the work begins. The rowboats are cast loose from the motor dory and start spreading the seine in a large circle. You can't see them yet, but inside that seine there are hundreds of small fish, and the boys start narrowing the spread of the seine as the boats begin to work in close together. When the ship gets the signal that the haul is made, she pulls over to the small boats. When the ship comes up close enough, the men aboard start hauling the small boats and the seine up alongside. Now you can see him.
Boy, that net is really alive.
Well, it was a pretty fair haul. The sardines are scooped up in dip nets and passed along hand to hand until the net is emptied in the bait tank. Fresh seawater is circulated through the bait tank, and they're fed regularly. Sometimes we hit rough weather after we leave the Gulf of Fonseca. The little fellas can't stand that, so then we lose our load of bait and have to turn back for more. Lots of fishermen run into the Gulf of Fonseca, and we trade news. On this trip, we heard that tuna was running farther south, so we headed in the direction of Panama. Now here are the real playfellows of the ocean, the porpoises. They love to leap and jump around the bow of a ship, just as they're doing here. The porpoise is really not a fish at all. It's a mammal, like a whale. We knew we were close to the tuna this time, so a man was kept on watch in the crow's nest all the time. It wasn't long before he sighted a school of tuna and sang out his sight. We looked over and saw this school about half a mile away. Thousands of fish there. This is where everybody on the tuna clipper really gets busy. The platforms are over the side and the boys start climbing out on them with their poles, ready to go when we reach the school. The fellow standing by the bait tank is the chummer. He dips his net and pulls up bait to throw out to bring the tuna up close where they'll strike the hooks. We change our course and slow the engines so we come right up to the school. Then the chummer starts tossing out sardines. The tuna turn to rush at the sardines and come in striking distance. There they come. I always get a kick out of this sight, and I've been fishing tuna for years. Now they're really coming. Those boys sure get a workout in a school like this. No time to stop for anything. Land one and throw the hook back in and another one grabs it.
They certainly are pulling them in.
These are what we call one-pole fish. They run 25 to 40 pounds in weight.
The small one-pole fish are the kind we use for all our fancy pack tuna.
Here you can see them just as they come out of the sea, in all their bright, glistening colors. The tuna is one of the prettiest fish in the whole ocean, besides being one of the fastest and the gamest.
Just look at that. How long do they strike like that?
What you see there on deck is about as much as we catch at one time in a school. They stop striking about as quick as they began. When we stop fishing, we have to put the catch away at once. We turn a hose on the first, then stow them away in the hold. The refrigerating machinery has the hold chilled and ready to keep the tuna as fresh as the minute it's caught. The men are all busy here putting the fish away. They're scattered all over the deck, passing the tuna along, and that ended our first day's fishing. Here's morning the next day. The sea is calm, and the sun comes up to light another day for us. We had to shake the cameraman twice to get him up for these early morning pictures. We didn't know what time we might sight another school of tuna, so everybody was on the job. We ran into a big school of tuna and circled around to position. These are bigger than the ones we caught the day before. Here are some that are so big that it takes 2 men to land them. The men team up in pairs, with 2 poles holding the same hook. When the big boy strikes, they both heave together and bring him up on deck. These tuna average 40 to 60 pounds in weight. And here are some even bigger. They need 3 men to hoist them out of the water. 3-pole fish weigh over 60 pounds.
These big fellows aren't used for the fancy pack tuna. They have the same flavor and all that, but they're not quite as delicate and tender as the smaller fish used in the fancy pack.
Our luck held out. In a few days we had a full hold, all iced and stowed away, and we were ready to return.
I suppose about this time the men are pretty eager to get back.
You bet they are. But because we've got a full catch doesn't mean there's nothing to do. We spend the time on the way home scrubbing down, painting, polishing, repairing gear, and putting everything in ship-shape order.
Is that a little shrine in some port down there?
No, sir. Fishermen are deeply religious, and our men truly appreciate that chapel. It's right on the main deck. Here's Sparks at work. We carry complete radio equipment and a first-class operator. There's something the fellows enjoy when they have time off. Well, there's Los Angeles breakwater again. We made good time on the trip, but that is always a welcome sight because, well, it means home again.
Well, the picture certainly turned out well, didn't they? They were fine, all right. I envy you fellas, Bob, being able to make that trip.
You know, Cobb, it's one thing to handle a product, but it's an entirely different matter when you know the whole story behind it.
But you haven't seen it all yet. This is only the part where we catch the tuna. We have another reel here that shows how we prepare it and pack it. I'll put it on for you. Most of this film was made in Mr. Gates' department, in the cannery. So, Gates, I'm going to ask you to do the same for these pictures that the captain did for the fishing pictures, so that Mr. Lane will understand what the different shots are about. Now, turn off the lights again, please.
We lose no time unloading the boat after it's docked. That big bucket holds several 100 pounds of tuna, but it has to go down in the hold many times to bring out all that cargo. The tuna get a washing in fresh water as soon as they come off the boat to remove all the seawater. Then they go up an escalator to the weighing scales. The weight of the cargo is checked, and the tuna are graded for size. The different sizes going their different ways.
That flume would look right in place in a lumber mill.
Now, we find it's a good way to take the tuna inside the cannery. No long moving belts, just water and gravity. And the tuna gets still more washing as they move along. Here's the way we cook tuna after they're cleaned. They're put in those wire basket racks and rolled inside that oven. The tuna is cooked slowly for several hours in a low steam pressure, depending upon the size of the fish. You see, Mr. Lane, there isn't much steam inside when the door is open. The tuna looks the same, but even at this stage, it's ready to eat. Those girls aren't hired for their looks, although it might seem that way until you watch them work. We had this one work slowly, so we could show how thoroughly this job is done. She breaks the tuna in two, removes the spine and the bones attached to it. Then she scrapes away every bit of dark meat, leaving just the firm but tender light meat. Then she puts the tuna on a wooden block, and the block goes in place on a belt that moves intermittently, the same distance with each move. That carries the tuna under the knife that cuts it into uniform lengths. Now it's ready for the cans.
Mr. Lane, all of our tuna cans are now inside enameled. This has been a very costly improvement, but it's done for better protection of the tuna and the delicate flavor.
You don't use mechanical can fillers?
No, not for the fancy solid pack. You see, a machine would break it up. To fill fancy tuna into cans, there isn't any substitute for human hands. The girls select chunks of just the right size to fill a can. They are so good at their job that there hardly ever is any variation in weight.
But we don't trust to them alone. The cans are checked for weight after they're filled to make sure they meet the weight guarantee on the label.
Now, this is the machine for grated-style tuna. It was perfected by our own men, and is something so completely new and different in the industry that we have it fully protected by patents. We've even covered up the operations so that about all you can see is the man putting the tuna into the hopper. As you notice, we use the same fish as for the solid pack. It goes directly into the hopper and is grated in this machine. The whole operation is mechanical, even to the filling of the can. We add salt and oil now. The dispenser measures salt precisely for each can, but we want to fill all the remaining space with oil, so each can passes under that row of oil jets.
What kind of oil is that?
It's the finest quality salad oil obtainable, Mr. Lane. We found it is the best for retaining the delicate tuna flavor, and it's processed and refined to our own specifications. Now, this is where the cans go through a steam exhaust to create a vacuum before they're capped. And this is the machine that caps the cans. It spins the caps in place and seals the can airtight in one operation. After the cans are sealed, they're carried on an automatic conveyor through washing machines to clean the outside of the cans thoroughly. Then the cans are placed in iron baskets and go into this retort for a second cooking for an hour and 20 minutes at 240 degrees temperature for thorough pasteurization.
Here is another invention of our staff. We call this machine a scrambler. The cans come into it turned in all directions. The motions of the machine make the cans drop into slots on edge. Then they roll away by a gravity conveyor.
That's a busy machine.
Well, that's the labeling machine, all automatic. The cans come down the conveyor system, the labels are wrapped around them, and they're all ready to be packed in cases.
But here's another step where human hands are better than machines. Not exacting work, of course, but this man must be on his toes to keep pace with the labeling machine. So that's how it's done. Seeing a can on a shelf, you'd have no idea of the fascinating story of how it got to be filled.
On the American Beauty, we catch the tuna to fill the can. But I'd like to know something about emptying it.
Just watch. All you need is a can opener. We photographed some of the dishes that can be made from our tuna. The large chunks of tender meat can be eaten just as they come from the can. Many people prefer the grated style, ready to spread for a sandwich and easy to mix for so many prepared dishes.
Back east, where we have more cold weather, hot tuna dishes are becoming very popular. I have noticed a big improvement in our wintertime sales during the past 2 years.
That's why we put out the Tuna Baker. And in the first 10 months of our Tuna Baker offer, we shipped out thousands and thousands of these individual tuna casseroles.
Yay, boy. That's the way I like it.
So do millions of others. But hot or cold, fresh from the can or prepared from any recipe, tuna is one of our finest foods. That's all the film.
I was working up a whale of an appetite looking at all those tuna dishes. Well, that's a very fine picture. I don't think it leaves a single question about the catching and packing of tuna unanswered. It certainly taught me plenty I didn't know about it. I want my entire organization to see this picture as well as the fishing film.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lane. Bob, you'll be in port for a few days now. What are you doing with your time?
Well, I have a few things I thought I might do.
Come on now, why all the mystery? What are your plans?
Well, there's a little spot where I have an idea a fellow might get a few trout, and I...
Boy, there's a news headline for you. A tuna clipper skipper goes fishing on his day off.